Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I apologize for the delay. I gave my friend Brenda the wrong link to the studio. Anyway, here we are now, just a couple of minutes late. Brenda, I think I met you originally on Clubhouse and then got to know you on LinkedIn. And then I was so excited to meet you in the city over this summer. And for anyone who, for
Yes.
some reason, does not know who you are, please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted to be here. And thank you so much, Annette, for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you today. So, I am a former corporate marketer turned into independent marketing consultant. And now, what I do is I specialize in LinkedIn. My catchphrase, if you will, is I help solopreneurs, business professionals, and job seekers get a bigger slice of the LinkedIn pie. And I do that through a variety of methods: one to one coaching, team training. I do conference presentations. I've got a podcast. I've got some online courses, and I published a book as well. And I'm having an absolute blast.
So, you know what? Excuse me for stepping away, but I had to bring this. This is Brenda's book, which, as you can see, I
Yay!
have a copy of, and it is fabulous. And I hear that there might be a second edition coming out in the
It's
future.
it's 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 noodling, and I'm debating right now whether it's a second edition updating what's changed on LinkedIn, or what I'm even thinking is maybe it's a different category, maybe focusing on company pages or something a little bit different in this iteration. We'll see.
Okay. Well, whatever it is, I'll be grabbing it. So again, I'm so excited to have you here and that you picked this topic. As you know, I have a podcast. Many of our friends and colleagues have podcasts, and I have learned recently, like all the mistakes that I'm making, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. But first, how is LinkedIn different? Like, if I have a podcast as opposed to just being a service provider, how should my strategy be different?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's funny because there's probably a lot of people that are listening right now or watching that are thinking about doing a podcast, or maybe similar to me, they had it on their to-do list for years. And it was almost similar to writing a book. Like, I want to do it. I want to do it. People are asking me for a book. People are asking me for a podcast. I'll get around to it, but it just seems like a mountain to climb to actually do the launching of it. But the ironic thing is, if you're doing live events already, whether it's LinkedIn Live or audio events or webinars, it's not really that much different. And there are some tools that are a little bit different with it. The difference is, on a podcast, it's mainly audio. And I say mainly audio because nowadays you can watch podcasts, on YouTube. And a
Hmm.
lot of podcasters will say you can go watch the live show here or watch the playback here as well. But I think the strategy is a bit different in that, you could be reaching different audiences. So I think you want to think about that first and foremost, where you're getting in their ear, every day, every week, depending on how often you publish. So I think audio quality is really key, having really good audio quality. But also, I'm coming from that marketing background. So I'm always thinking about who is my intended target audience? What are my business, my career goals? And then from their perspective, what are they looking to get out of the podcast? And is it clear to the audience, to the listeners, what they're gaining for? So I don't know about you, Annette, but when I first launched my podcast, I kind of fully immersed myself into learning as much as I could from different people who were podcast producers and podcast course creators, and people just teaching different podcasting methodologies. And there are some elements that are a little bit different. When you think about your podcast title, the name of your show, you need to make sure that it's in the right category. And you've got your show title. Mine is called Enthusiastically Self Employed. And then you can also put like a subheading underneath that, which clarifies this is LinkedIn marketing and business tips for coaches, consultants, speakers, and authors. So you can include some of those keywords in there. But I think you really got to like immerse yourself into learning about podcasts if you're on the start to that journey. And I'll say, Annette, I just launched mine in, I think it was the end of March. So I am by no means an expert, but I do feel comfortable knowing some of the ins and outs at this point too.
Well, I appreciate it. You had shared some strategies with me and things that I've learned because you shared some resources that I can use, and you're welcome to share whatever you would like that you think would help people. And one of the things I started my podcast in 2020. I started my LinkedIn Lives in 2021, and I just kind of threw them up there on the podcast. And then I realized after learning recently that just having me there doing interviews all the time is not necessarily, or is definitely probably not the best strategy for a podcast, because as you are and we all are, I think we do LinkedIn Lives, I invite people here to so I can learn from them and our audience can learn from them. People are here to see you. They're not here to see me. And so if you have only interviews, you lose a little bit, of having yourself as the expert. So I know you can talk a little bit about this. So if you would, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think there's a mix you need to come up with, and I'm not going to take credit for this. I know I've been following, like I said, a lot of people who are already leaps and bounds ahead of me, and one in particular, Adam Shibely, I believe I pronounced it correct. Adam, if I didn't, I'll get closer to it one day. But he has a podcast called Podcasting Business School, and he offers you complimentary podcast audits, or mini audits, I think is what he calls them. And during the discussions, he asks you about your goals and your audiences and what would success look like in 6 months or a year or whatnot. And then we got to talking about, kind of the structure and what my podcasts look like. And for me, similar to you, I've been doing LinkedIn Live interviews for years, and I've probably got 3 to 4 years of a library, a content library that I can now convert. Now, at the beginning of this year, I shifted the focus, whereas before I just called it social media pie, and it was inspiring people, that was the P, who inform was the I, and educate was the U. And it was just really a smattering of interesting people from different backgrounds, and there was really no rhyme or reason.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was job seeker focused, sometimes it was corporate, sometimes it was solopreneur, it was a little mishmash. This year, I decided to focus in more on targeting people who are solopreneurs. So my interviews are much more succinct in terms of the topics and the categories we're covering. But what I learned from Adam is you really should have a mix, and it's maybe, a third of each. So a third interviews, where it's
Hmm.
like me and you today. You're interviewing me, I'm answering questions, I'm bringing in my expertise. And he suggested a third should be solo talk, so it's just you talking,
Hmm.
and a third should be you demonstrating what you're doing. So maybe it's a profile, in my case, a profile mini audit, maybe a 15-minute interview where I pull someone up on screen, I do a profile mini audit, and it's just me and that person, and it's not alive. So I'm starting to change my mix a bit, but I will say, I guess I'm lucky because I have those, 3 to 4 years of content to pull from that I can convert. I'm finding it's more of an effort to sit down and schedule the time to do the solo interviews. But I just did one. I don't know if, are you a Taylor Swift fan, Annette, or
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes.
So, the concert was like sold out. It was impossible to get tickets unless you wanted to pay for, $2,000 tickets, mortgage to mortgage. It was insane. And we didn't. But we went to the movie this past week, and it was such a fun experience. It was my husband. So we had kind of a date night. My daughter brought a friend with her, and we went to the movies, and we got the Taylor Swift drinking cup, and they handed out mini posters, and they had adult beverages in the bar part of the theater. I got a I think it was the red drink. I don't remember what it's called, but it was like a whole concert experience. And then you sit in the movie theater and you watch her show, and it's like almost 3 hours. And I was just thinking throughout, I'm like, she's a marketer, she's an entertainer, and I was like learning all these things. And I ended up doing a podcast, and I talked for 15 minutes about marketing and speaking lessons that I learned by going to the Taylor Swift movie. So sometimes it's like, coming up with content and topics for your podcast can be challenging, but then I want to put on my marketing and my marketing hat, my LinkedIn hat, like what am I hoping to impart upon my audience and make it entertaining? But that can definitely be, I don't want to say a struggle, a challenge. You need to put the
Hmm.
effort into doing it. And if you have that content like you and I do, I mean, that's the easy part. All we need to do is convert it, but I think
Yeah.
you need to put your own voice in there too.
And I will second that. You turned me on to Podcasting Business School, and I have devoured, burned
Yeah.
right through where I'm at the current one I just was listening to this morning. And I mean, I have worked with you myself, and when I do things, I told you, I think, what would Brenda do? What would Brenda do? And it really, because I think you are a very, very smart marketer.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and the whole idea of the mix too is interesting. When I first started my podcast, it was just me talking, and I had like 10 maybe 15-minute things, and then it just seemed the natural thing to go to the lives. But so what are maybe some of the mistakes that you see people, podcasters, making, like with LinkedIn, maybe things they're doing they shouldn't, or things they're not doing that they should? I'm guessing there's
Yeah,
more of the latter.
yeah, and it's funny because I put together a checklist, and I'll drop the link into the comments. I think it's already in there right now. But I put together a LinkedIn for Podcasters checklist because these are the things when I started getting really immersed into the podcasting community. These are the things I would do as I was going and trying to find these people on LinkedIn. And there was one person in particular, I was listening to their podcast and I actually wanted to do business with them. I'm like, I want to pay this person money to help coaching me in these areas, and I went to their LinkedIn profile, and it's not uncommon that people that are heavy podcasters aren't super active on LinkedIn. A lot of times I find that they're more active on Instagram,
Hmm.
Facebook somewhat, but it's more Instagram is where I'm finding them being active. But when I go on LinkedIn, even if it's a business related topic or finding somebody like me who's super active on LinkedIn, they're not active.
Hmm.
So when I went to this person's profile, first of all, I was trying to figure out, is this the right person? Because I knew the name of their show, but I was not clear on their name. And I even had to go back to the podcast and look up the spelling, and I tried to look on their profile, and I wasn't connected with them, Annette, at this point. So I couldn't click on contact info and get their contact information, their email, things like that, their website. So I had to kind of scroll around their profile and figure out, like, where do I go to learn more about them? Is
Hmm.
there a website link? Is there an email? And I think that's the first thing. Like, look at if you're a podcaster, look at your LinkedIn profile, but don't click on your contact info, and see if you can figure out a way to do business with you
Hmm.
without being connected. So you can't message them, you can't click on contact info, because the reality is we do have podcast listeners that are not connected to us. And then in this case, this individual wasn't active on LinkedIn. So even though I had sent them an invitation, they didn't accept it right away. And I think it was a couple months later they finally accepted it.
Hmm.
So I think that's one big thing right there, big nugget for them.
Yeah, that seems to be a thing for everyone. I mean, I've worked with a lot of job seekers. You have worked with job seekers, and as a former recruiter, if I looked at a profile and it was kind of like a maybe, I wouldn't necessarily use an in-mail. I would pass them by. But if they had their contact information there, it's kind of a no-brainer. Yes, let me
Yeah.
contact them and see. And so I think that's kind of a thing for everyone to have contact information in their about section. So,
Sprinkled throughout too. So assume the person looking at your profile is not connected to you, because there's probably, I don't know what the percentages are in it. I would think more people looking at your profile. I don't know if it's 50-50. Let's just say it is 50-50. Let's assume 50% of the people looking at your profile are your connections, and they can message you or click on contact info. And let's assume the other 50%, just for argument's sake, is not connected to you.
mhm,
So is it clear to them how they can get a hold of you? Or if they're not,
mhm,
maybe they're not ready to get a hold of you yet. They're on the fence about, do they want to do business with you? Do you have something that is meeting their needs? They want to research you more. Is it easy for them to figure that out? Now,
mhm,
could I have gone on Google? Yeah, I could have, but I'll be honest, I'm more comfortable researching people on LinkedIn, and that's the network that I'm a heavy user on.
mhm,
So I think you got to think about, it's another takeaway too. Think about, where can your intended target audience be found? There are some people that are only on LinkedIn that are not on Facebook. They're not on Instagram. They're not on Twitter or X or whatever they're trying to call it these days. They're not anywhere else. They're only on LinkedIn. And maybe they don't want to bother themselves by doing a Google search because there's a million other businesses. I'm exaggerating, but that sound similar to yours, and they don't want to figure out which one is it. They want to really be served up on a silver platter. Like, here's the way to do business with Brenda Muller. They want to find
right.
that on LinkedIn.
Right. Yeah, I think of the easy button, and I had somebody tell me that
Yeah.
make it easy. Don't put up anything that's not going to make it easy. And people are so thinking that we're unique. Well, I have a sister-in-law whose name is Annette Richmond. So,
Oh, really? Yeah.
yeah, actually we're yeah, she's a veterinarian in California. And so, you think that, oh, we're so unique, people don't realize, their name and everything, but it is true. You have to differentiate yourself. So,
Mm.
I'm going to be downloading that checklist for podcasters, but can you give people who might be listening to this on the podcast maybe a
Yeah.
couple of little tips from
Yeah,
that?
we'll keep going. So
Cool.
I'll give you, I think it's like a 4 or 5 page I'll give you like one tip that's on every page. Does that sound good? And we'll kind of keep going through
Whatever
it.
you want to give, we will take.
So, let me give you another tip then. So, let's look at you are a podcaster. Someplace in your headline on LinkedIn, you should have the word podcaster or podcast host or something. Or maybe
Hmm.
it's the name of your podcast. And if maybe you're marketing the name of your podcast more than you are your own name, I'm going to use Adam again, Podcasting Business School. And I even
Hmm.
struggle with his last name because
It's a
when he
toughie.
when he comes on, he's like, "Hey, this is Adam. Welcome." What does he say? Welcome, Pod Pals, to the Podcasting Business School. And he might say his last name, but he doesn't really say it a lot because it's tricky to sound. So I know him as Adam from Podcasting Business School. So when I look him
Mhm.
up on LinkedIn, I'm like, "Is this the right Adam?" If it says podcast host or podcast someplace in his headline, I know it's him. Like that's in an instance. So if podcasting is a major part of your business, absolutely use that headline field to add in the word podcast or podcast host, or maybe put the name of your podcast if it's a highly recognizable name.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's another tip on there. I'm going to go down to the another page. Here's another thing. So as podcasters, we hope that publish it and they will come and they will find us, right? Like
Oh, yes, of course.
me. I'm on Apple, I'm on, all these other podcasting platforms and they'll find me. Yeah, if they're already subscribing and if they open up the podcast app, they will. So, one thing is, you should be publishing out content and reminders and maybe emailing your list once a week and saying, here's my new podcast episodes. But what I like to do is on LinkedIn, post about a recent podcast. And if you're doing this on a fairly regular basis, you certainly could do once a week. You could do a
Mhm.
post about your podcast once a week. And a lot of tools nowadays, like I use Buzzsprout, and they have inside the paid version of Buzzsprout,
Mhm.
you can create like an audiogram up to, I don't even know what the length is. I usually try to do like 30 seconds to a minute of a clip with the
Mhm.
little radial button that kind of has the
Right.
sound waves going on it, and you can pick the portion of the interview that you want. It grabs the cover graphic. You can download it as an MP4, and then when you upload it, it's got the burned in sound and the visuals already there. So my advice is post about a recent podcast, and I would say do this at least once a month. At least once a month.
Yeah.
If you're publishing podcast content regularly, you certainly could go weekly. And I think a lot of people, Annette, and tell me what you think, is they struggle with even coming up with posts at all on LinkedIn. So I think if you get a weekly show, publish it weekly, but I think
Mhm.
monthly would be at minimum. What do you think about that?
No, I agree, and I use Buzzsprout too for my podcast, and it is so simple to go on there and just pull those little audio clips. And it's interesting because I was talking to and obviously I try to post 5 times a week. I'm not always good
Yeah.
at it. If I do more than that, I kind of pat myself on the back. But it is. But one of the things, and as you're saying this, because I used to do that and I haven't done it in a long time with my podcast, is first of all, you have to think about it. You have to put it on your list of things that you're going to do.
Right.
And, I think it's just, if you think of it like, because creating content is, I don't want to say hard or challenging, but it takes time to create content. And pulling a audio like that from your podcast is not doesn't take a lot of time.
It doesn't. And once I think once you get into the habit and you've established a process how to do so, it does not take a lot of time. It's more like and don't overthink it. I have an intern who helps me with this, but I always do all of my processes first to figure out how to do them, and then I instruct her, and then I'm always like I tell her, I'm like, "If you can figure out a better way to do it, go for it." But in this case, I literally tell her, "Pick any interesting audio clip that you can." If it's a solo interview, it's just me, so just pick me talking. If it's me interviewing my guest, and I'll say, like, if I interviewed Annette, I wanna make sure that, that the clip that you're pulling from the audiogram is Annette talking. It's not me. Because if I'm looking to merchandise the podcast featuring this person, their area of expertise, I don't want me to be being the person talking. I really want
Mhm.
to feature my guest. So, and we were just talking about this morning. I was doing a project review with her, and she had created a clip for the Taylor Swift podcast. And I said, "Yeah, I listened to it." And I said, "I'm not sure if I'm crazy about it." And she's like, "Yeah, I was trying to make it, this." And I said, "You know what? I'm overthinking it. Just publish it. It's not like, it does not really matter in the big scheme of things." I think if somebody is a Taylor Swift fan, or if they enjoy the content that I put out, they see that I have a new podcast, they're interested, they're going to click over. It doesn't really matter which clip that we use. If the topic is of interest and they're interested in listening to the person, I think they'll pop on over. But a lot of it is just practice and experience, right? And not just like getting in the habit of doing these things.
Well, what you just said, and please do ask your questions of Brenda because she's so generous with her knowledge. Because I'm looking over and I'm seeing like light bulbs and things like that coming up, so people are engaged even if they're not commenting. But I think one thing you said is so important, and it holds so many people back about all their content is that it has to be perfect. It has to be just right. It has to just be whatever. And you're saying no.
Yeah. I think done is better than perfect, and I read this recently, and I wish I could remember where I read it from, and they said, like, if you wanna get really good at something, you just gotta do it a lot, and do it more, and do it more, and practice doing it. And honestly, even, like, in these LinkedIn Live interviews, Annette, now you've been doing these for a while. I think you do a great job as an interview host. Myself, I've been doing these, like I said, for a couple years. If I look back at the first few shows, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what was I doing?"
Yeah.
They're probably, to the outside person, they're not that bad, but I notice things like right now, I try to look at the camera. And if you're watching this on video, I'm tapping my camera. My camera is kind of like eye level. And if I
Mhm.
look at Annette, it's down here. So in the beginning, I was really focusing on looking at my guests. Now I'm focusing on looking at the camera. And I always tell my guests when they come into the interview, I give them reminders at the beginning, but I will say things like, make sure that you're looking at the camera, not at the screen. Unless you see comments popping up, feel free to pull them up. But when you're doing a podcast, I think similarly, and there's something that's to be said in that with like watching yourself on video. I don't know about you, I get like, oh, I can't stand myself. But you get past that shudder, and then you start to focus on the technical elements.
Mhm.
How does the audio sound? Do I seem like I'm engaging and interactive, or does it seem like it's stiff and I'm looking nervous? Things like lighting, and so it's similar to the podcast. When I first started publishing, I'm like, "Oh, I can't listen to myself." It's like cringy, like nails on a chalkboard listening to myself. But now I listen to them because I want to make sure, the audio quality is good from start to finish. There's been a few times where we've exported something from LinkedIn Live, and similar to your show, we have a sound bed at the beginning, like that intro video that plays and the outro at the end. And either myself or my intern, one of us, we forgot to delete out the audio of the music bed. So there's a way inside of Buzzsprout that you can edit. You can upload a new, podcast in its place. But I wouldn't have known that had I not made that mistake the first time.
Mhm.
So you'll know, Annette, I say I don't make mistakes. I have learning experiences. And what I try to do is whenever I have one of those learning experiences, as much as possible, I try to share it back with my community. And instead of, I'm not trying to be a perfectionist and 100% polished production, I'd rather have some of those learning mistakes happen so that I can tell other people what happened. And I think similar to podcasting, I've had a couple of times where if I do solo interviews, I use Audacity, and I had the microphone pulling up from the laptop and not from my fancy microphone. Now, I would never have learned that if I had not had the mistake slash learning experience
Mhm.
doing it.
Mhm.
And I think I even in one of my shows I referenced that, and I said, I'm not going to correct it, but if you go back to the first or the second show, you can hear it. So I'm letting people know where they can go and learn from my mistakes, my learning experiences. But I think you just get good at doing more. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. And the same thing with me. I'm trained, I mostly look at the camera and it feels awkward at first. And yes, I
Yeah.
am a person, there's no photos of me because I hate to see myself in a picture. I hate to see myself on video. I wanted to be younger and thinner and all that stuff. But, we are who we are.
Mhm.
Although, StreamYard does have a nice little soft filter. So that's always nice. But
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
one of the things that I think is so important about what you said is the idea that it's all about the message and the person you're delivering the message to. It's not about us. It's not about you. It's not about how we look. It's how it sounds to the audience. Is it clear? Is the message good? So I know that someone okay, we have a LinkedIn question here. Do you want to give that a quick answer?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the question is, when I have a client who wants his LinkedIn profile to be optimized, can I take his credentials and log into his LinkedIn account and optimize it myself? So I'm going to make sure first of all, I'm going to point back to the rules of LinkedIn, the terms of service on LinkedIn, and technically. I want to make sure that you're clear on this. LinkedIn will say you are not to share your login credentials with anyone. It should only be you going into your account and posting as yourself and creating your profile and all those other things. Now, there are many people that are LinkedIn coaches, trainers, experts. And even when you think about at the executive level, and I'm in Metro Detroit, Mary Barra is the head of GM. Is Mary Barra really going on LinkedIn and posting? Probably not. She probably has an agency that's posting on her behalf or her marketing or branding department. And I think sometimes LinkedIn looks the other ways on those individuals that are higher level executives and influencers because they know somebody. Mary Barra did not create her LinkedIn account. I can guarantee that somebody created it for her.
Mhm.
So I think they tend to look the other way on things like that. But I will say the rules technically, if you read the terms of service, it will say no, you're not to go into anyone's LinkedIn profile to make the changes on their behalf. Could you? Yes, you could. Um, I'm not going to recommend one way or another on there, Annette. I'm going to stay away from that a bit. But technically, it would just be sharing those credentials. But I always tell people if you ever do share your login with anyone, even if it's a trusted intern, virtual assistant,
Mhm.
agency partner, anything like that, after they're done doing what they're doing, you should change your password. And
Yeah.
even before you share your LinkedIn password with them, I know a lot of us use the same passwords in different places. So they're using it on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and gosh, I hope it's not their personal email and their banking account. Like, I hope it's not the same consistently across. But a good rule of thumb is you should be using different passwords on every account. They should be strong passwords that you're using. They should be changed regularly. I remember when I worked in corporate and that it was like every 45 days, the IT department would like give you those warning message. You need to change your password now. And I'd wait until like the 45th day. But it's that way for a reason to help
Uh-huh.
to prevent hacks from occurring. And then after you've shared your login with anyone, you should change it immediately. In addition, I'll just add on to that on LinkedIn, there's a way to set up two-factor authentication. And that will make sure that if anyone does try to log into your account, you'll get a text message sent to your phone and you have to enter the code before you can proceed.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna stay a little bit back from that question. Technically, yes, but according to terms of service, no. Annette, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I will say that I have never logged into anyone's clients that I've worked with. It's been my policy to not do that because I know it's against the terms of service. I do have friends, colleagues who use the VPNs and they go in secretly and do that.
Yeah.
What I have always told, I mean, it's been my personal and business policy, and I have told clients that I work with, if we get caught, I get dinged, you get dinged, and who wants that? So that's
Yeah.
just my little piece. So we went off on a little tangent. Can you hang out for a little bit and share us a couple more podcast tips?
Yeah, let's bring the car back over to the podcast
Okay,
lane. We
awesome.
went rogue for a little bit there. So I think the last tip I was sharing was to share a podcast episode in a LinkedIn post. And I
Yes.
do like the audiograms as a way of sharing. Alternatively, you could just share the show link in your LinkedIn post. I always like to make sure if I'm going to share the show link, look at what the previewable image is, make sure that it's not blurry, make sure that it, has good resolution that's inside of there. Another thing that you can do if you have a podcast, and even if your podcast has been around for a while, I do recommend this tip. You can create a company page for your podcast. So I did this, Annette, when I first launched my podcast. It's called Enthusiastically Self-Employed. I created a LinkedIn company page. And there's a couple different ways that you can create a company page. You can create like a regular company page, which can be linked into your experience section. That's key. Or you can create a showcase page, which almost becomes like a product and service of your main page. Now, you can't link that into your profile. So that's
Mhm.
important to keep in mind. For the reason of linking it into your profile, I prefer to do the company page. Some larger organizations prefer to do subsets pages, so they're managing, controlling the brand a little bit. But what I like about it is when you create the company page and then once you add it to your profile as a new experience, and you can say add job title of podcast host at, and then you can link the company page to your podcast, the name of your podcast, Enthusiastically Self-Employed. There's a little green notify network button. And as long as you add it to your profile and you indicate the start date is the month that you are in. So let's say hypothetically, I added this to my profile today, created a new company page, but my podcast started in March. If I put my start date of March, LinkedIn's not going to push out a notification because it's old news.
Mhm.
But if I put my start date as October 2023 in that experience section, then LinkedIn will push out a notification to my connections and followers. And it will say, congratulate Brenda on being named podcast host at Enthusiastically Self-Employed. And then the magic starts to happen here, Annette. You get the homepage notifications. You start to get people congratulating you because it will appear in their homepage feed. You'll also get direct messages from people. Congratulations on your new role, Brenda. And a lot of times people will choose the pre-populated text that LinkedIn has. Sometimes they'll modify it, but a lot of times it's congratulations and best wishes in your new role. And, it's the same thing over and over again. And what I started doing is when they send me that, I will message them back. And, I copy and paste this, but I would say, thanks. It's actually not a new role. I launched my podcast in March, but I just got around to adding it on my LinkedIn profile. Do you listen to podcasts? If so, I love it if you could give my show a follow and tell me what you think. And I'm making this a nice one-to-one message. And any thoughts on that approach?
Well, I just learned something, so thank you very much. And you taught me that about when I launched my company, when I shifted and I
Yeah.
launched my new company to go back and do that, and I did that. So no, I think that's great. And I am launching a new podcast, LinkedIn Live, in January. I'm going to shift it along with the shift in my business, and so I'm going to be following all your advice for that as well.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share before we go? Because I know your time is valuable, and I'd love to have you stay here for like 2 hours,
If
but
anyone's Yeah, no, if anyone's listening, feel free to drop in any questions or whatnot. I'll give you one more thing. There's a featured section on your LinkedIn profile. So I'm one like Annette, I am an opportunistic marketer. Remember, I come from that corporate marketing background and I'm really heavy and deep into LinkedIn. So if LinkedIn launches new features, there's a bunch of us that will compare notes on the features that are coming out. And there's a couple people I hear from regularly. Kevin D. Turner, I'm going to give him a shout out right now. He's one of the
yep.
people I hear from. And he's got like a team of people who will find these new features in the wild and report it back. And he's one of the first people I'll hear things from. Often John Asperian is another person that I will hear things from as well. And what will happen is LinkedIn, when they launch new features and new things on our profile, they won't often tell you, hey, this exists on your profile. And they won't tell you like this is how you enable it or anything like that. It'll just be it one day will appear. And what happens typically is the LinkedIn training and coaching community, we are all independent. We do not work for LinkedIn. So we do not get access. Like LinkedIn doesn't send out a newsletter saying, hey guys, listen up. We're launching some. Like they don't do that. We have to figure things out on our own. And then we compare notes and we're like, who has it? How do you use it? How do you enable it? Kick the tires, figure out what to do, what not to do. Now, I'm not of the bleeding edge of announcing, new technology and new features in it. I'm probably more of the once it starts to become more mainstream, that's when I announce it because then I know that most people have it. So the featured some section is something that everyone has on their profile. If you don't see it, it's because you had not yet enabled it. So you can go to the top of your profile and it says add profile section. And then I think it says core, recommended, and additional. I could be wrong on the categories, but it's in the second one, recommended. And there's underneath that, you can click on add featured. So there's
Mhm.
two ways you can do it. You can go into that, add a new section, you can enable it from there, or even easier, if you post about a recent podcast, as soon as you're done publishing that post, click on the three dots and you'll see an option that will say add to featured. And that will enable the featured section and put it in there. And I like to tell people the featured section, I kind of think of it, Annette, like an end cap at the grocery store. And if I go to my local grocery store is Kroger. So if I go to Kroger, is it with an S or not? In Michigan, we say things with an S, but if I go to Kroger today, I might see an end cap promoting Halloween because we're getting closer to Halloween. Snickers and Kit Kats and Reese's peanut butter cups and candy corn and all the other, stuff. Now, in 2 to 3 weeks after Halloween's done, they're going to clear out that end cap and they're going to start promoting Thanksgiving decorations, and there'll be other things on there. So at the grocery store, they're always keeping their end caps fresh because they're trying to promote and feature products. So when we as the shoppers are going at the end of the aisle, we're looking and putting things in our cart, right? So on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, I want you to think about the featured section. That's your end cap for your grocery store, so to speak. So what are the items that you want shoppers to put in their carts this week, this month, this year? A lot of times what I see people doing, Annette, is they set up their featured, like they set it up like 2 years ago and they've never rotated new product in, and it kind of becomes stale and boring. And even sometimes you look at articles and YouTube links and they're outdated. So I like to rotate in featured content regularly. I try to change out at least one of those items a week. And you and I both do a weekly event email. We can rotate new things in. But if you're a podcaster and you're regularly publishing new content for your podcast, put one of your podcasts in the featured section, and that will help to drive some visibility.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's certainly good for the LinkedIn newsletter too. But yes, I do my weekly events thing because I learned that from you, and so I learned so much. Anyway, so you are going to drop, or you already dropped the podcast checklist in the comments, but
Drop
you
it in
will.
again. But just for folks that joined a little bit late, I'll drop it in as a comment in here right now. So that way it'll pop up to the top. And I always find like LinkedIn lives are a little bit wonky. You only see comments. It's kind of like a Zoom call. You only see the chat at the point that you joined the session. Now, if you go watch the
Yes,
playback, you can see everything. But if you're
right.
just coming in now and you missed it at the beginning of the show, you missed it. But I will say at a high level, you can just go to my website, mellermarketing.com, and I have 6 different LinkedIn checklists that are listed on my homepage, one of which is the LinkedIn for Podcasters checklist. And you can grab any of the downloads you want. But if you want to grab that one, just go directly to mellermarketing.com/your podcast, all one word, and you can grab it from there.
So I have one more question for you
Sure.
before obviously tell everybody where to reach you and everything. So you do a bunch of groups.
Mhm.
Which one of them would be good for a podcaster?
Oh, good question. So I started doing, I think you're referring to my Friday calls, my
I
Friday
am.
VIP office hours. So we used to do every Friday was for job seekers. And in August of this year, I decided to change it up and make sure that I was serving all of my audiences, because job seekers is certainly one subset that I do serve, but I also serve people who are coaches and people that are business professionals and people that have different topics in mind. So I have every Friday is a slightly different topic. And on the first Friday of the month, it's for job seekers. So if you go to mellermarketing.com/Friday VIP, and I'll drop the link into the comments right now. The first Friday is for job seekers. The second Friday, which was last week, was for coaches, consultants, speakers, and authors. So that would be a good one for podcasters. The third Friday, which is this Friday, is for company pages on LinkedIn. That would be a good one too, because we can talk about, launching your company page to support your podcast, what you post on there, etc. The fourth Friday next week will be social media managers and marketers. That one could potentially, we can cover some things about podcasts. And then I decided in that to add in a fifth Friday as well. Now, you know that not every month has 5 Fridays because of the way that the days fall. So I think in an average year, you'll see like 5 months that will have Fridays. I could be mistaken on that, but it's about 5 months out of the 12. The only month in the remainder of the year that will have a fifth Friday will be December. And I think it's December 29th. In that session, I'm going to focus on tech tips. What do I call it? Let me look at the topic real quick. Tech check and tech tips. So a lot of times I will get people coming on and asking questions like, what microphone do you use? Or, hey, how did you get those lights coming up behind you? Or what are you using for your webcam light or even your webcam itself?
Mhm.
And sometimes we'll talk about, how to frame ourselves in the Zoom camera, how to look at the camera. So we're going to talk about technology, and we'll also do some tech checks. So we might even talk about inside the session, how does your audio sound? How does your lighting look? And I do you're on Speaker Friends Friday as well, right? You're an Innovation Women. Right,
Yes,
Annette?
yes,
Okay,
yes,
so I don't
yes.
know, were you on the session a couple weeks ago where I was talking about my lighting and I said, "I cannot figure this out." It looks Were
Yes,
you on
yes,
that one?
yes, and we're all changing our lighting
Yeah,
while we're
and it was like, I mean, I now have on my phone, I've got an app for the lighting tool that I use, and just watch as I'm doing this right now. I can make it, different settings, but when you make your light brighter, it actually makes it look like really dark in the background. And I was trying to figure out like how do I adjust my lighting so that you can see what's in the background? And I kept making it brighter thinking that's going to help. And the people said, "No, you actually need to make it dimmer." Right? And look at as I'm doing that right now on screen.
Oh,
So
wow.
stuff like that, like what I'm calling it tech checks, I will like inside the Zoom call, we're going to be like, okay, let's get everybody framed up inside the camera. And even right now, you and I, Annette, we're both looking at the camera. What I try to do with my interviews, and I didn't do this. This is my mistake at the beginning. I should have said, let's try to make sure we're at the same eye level and the same distance to the camera. You ever do an
Oh.
interview or you ever watch an interview where your guest is like this big
Oh, yes,
on
yes, I had one.
and you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
like a tiny little like head in the background, and in an audio format like on the podcast it doesn't really matter, but when you're in a live session you want to have people at about the same eye level, the same distance to the camera, because you want them to look almost like they're sitting next to each other. So
Mhm,
that will be a
mhm.
topic that we'll be covering, and I think we could talk about some podcasting technology in there as well. And I'm going to be inviting experts from different areas. Bobby, and I'm blanking on his last name, the Zoom guy. If you guys know his name, go ahead and tag him. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that. Christopher Johnson is another guy who's got
Oh,
a lot
he's
of Zoom
awesome, yeah.
expertise. Vicky O'Neill, I've invited her to talk about video in there at some point, and I might even ask Adam to come in and talk about podcasting tech tips at some point too. So we'll see. But yeah, that's kind of the
Well
rundown.
well, I'm gonna have to sign up for that too. I've signed up for one of yours. I should try to be there every week because I, learn something. And it's always nice to meet other people that you can chat with as well. So,
Yeah.
I have kept you here for a long, long time, and I appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, I just want to say thank you so much. And, if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me here on LinkedIn. If you do want to connect with me when you visit my LinkedIn profile, I have the follow button enabled because I've got creator mode set up. So you'll have to go to the more button and then mention that you heard me on Annette's live show here, or maybe you heard me on the podcast. I'd be happy to connect with you. And alternatively, you can go to mellermarketing.com and you can learn about some of the LinkedIn training and resources that I offer there as well.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's been here. And have a great rest of your day.